Well, hello there, friends from the internet. This is Scott from Science Bro, where we bring you some of the latest technology and knowledge and innovation from the regulated and commercial cannabis spaces. If you don't know who I am, this is Scott from Crescent Soil Services. For the last 12 or 14 years or so, my wife and I have provided professional consulting advice to some of the largest and most influential cannabis farms on the planet. So today what we're going to do is try to bring you a little bit of information of something that I have been thinking about here for a bit. Sorry, I'm here by myself. I got to make sure all the stream settings are working and that we're actually talking to the internet, which it does appear that we are. So something that I was thinking about over the last few weeks as our travel schedules kicked off and we're starting to get into the busier time of the year is the music is still on. Thank you, Sammy. I thought something was funky. There we go. Thank you, brother. Thanks for coming, Sammy. I really appreciate you. All right, we're just going to go ahead and start over. All right. Thanks for tuning in to Science Bro, where we bring you... we don't got to do that again. Anyways, we're out here streaming. It's been a busy couple weeks, and I've had something on my mind as we've been traveling. We've been on some planes here recently and had a lot of time to sit and think about some things that I wanted to talk about on this show. So one thing that we see everywhere we go is different strategies and approaches and personalities and how those come into play in the cultivation space. And basically, cultivators of any size and shape and type can be put into basically 3 or 4. You'll see I actually have 4, but we're going to talk about 3 main groups, and then we're going to split one of those into 2 groups. And so, but generally speaking, people can be put into 3 main styles of cultivation. And sorry, I got to move this thing real quick. There we go. So basically there's 3 different types of cultivators out there. And I wanted to kind of go over those with you. So basically what we've got is at the top, your industry leaders. So those are the people that everybody knows about. They often are the ones that set the trends or set the goalpost markers that people are chasing for. Then below them, you've got the commercially viable, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're a massive operation. You could be 4 lights in a back bedroom and commercially viable. And basically what commercially viable means is you're paying the bills with the activity. So that could be 4 lights, that could be 400 lights. But basically you are a person that is engaging in this activity like a business. You're treating it like a business, and the activity of the cultivation of cannabis needs to pay those bills. And then below that, we've got our hobbyists, home growers, and newbies, right? So let's just go ahead and dive into those. So we're going to start and kind of work our way up with the hobbyists, home growers, and newbies first. And one thing that's undeniably consistent amongst this group is they will always reach for the next new flashy product, hoping that some new surfactant or cocoa nuts or some type of shit is going to solve their problem or increase the yield. Oftentimes the canopy management techniques they do is what's actually decreasing the yield. So they don't really understand where yield come from or where problems come from. So it becomes this process of reaching for something new, the next new nutrient line, some other aloe vera product, some soil input, something flown in from across the world. And oftentimes this seems to be one of the most important parts. This type of grower really enjoys this part of the process. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be shrunk down to the smallest of growers. There's lots of people that grow for a hobby or they're new to growing and they just like bringing in new flashy products. So they're also almost always going to look to their local hydro store, their online retailer of goods. Instagram has been a huge one since about 2012, and other online resources to try and solve problems or figure out what the issue is. And so I started into cannabis in about 2009, and in 2010 and 11 was a major shift in California in what I call the Prop 215 comfort era, where you could pretty much stack 99 plant licenses without fear of getting in trouble. And what that did was it opened the market and changed it forever. And prior to that period of about 2010, you would see what I call the B2B communication, which is bro to bro. So if you wanted to learn how to grow cannabis, you had to meet somebody in person, they had to trust you, and they had to want to teach you these things. But once we got into the Prop 215 comfort era and pretty much everybody could feel comfortable just growing, well, then it became the hydro store was kind of that main source for information and solving problems. And often that's where this, in my opinion, where this shift in searching for a new product to solve a problem became the norm. This is also the time when pesticide and IPM strategies went from maybe one application in a harvest cycle to two or three times in a harvest cycle. And the industry is still like that. And now around 2012, 2013, Instagram really took off. And then Instagram became the source for how do we do things, basically. And that's a whole nother subject for a different video of how that's gotten completely out of control. But main characteristics of the hobbyist, homegrowers, and newbies is they're looking to the people that sell you things for their information, and they're looking for something to be sold to them that will solve a problem. That's a really important takeaway there. Because of this dynamic of buying things and trying to solve problems with products, they often never really understand the root cause to a cultivation issue and never actually solve any problems. A lot of times it's a lot of frustration, but again, it's hobbyists. We're doing it for the love of it, maybe a little bit of head stash. It's usually not a very big garden, so if you have a bug problem in a 4x4 tent, you can reach in there and pop the aphids by hand. And so sometimes these problems, you can keep it under control through physical means, basically, which does not become a reality in the next stage, which right now is kind of a random segue. But in commercial cannabis, there has never been more people coming from the hobbyist tent grower thrust into large commercial facilities. And that's a whole 3-hour episode we'll go over. But as far as the industry, there's never been more people in the highest commercial scale with the least experience. A lot of those people are tent growers that are getting commercial opportunities, and there's a big gap in education there. And I think there's some real value to being inside the grow room, where most of our hobbyists and home growers are growing in tents. And it's very difficult to truly understand the environment in that cultivation space if you can't get inside the grow room, right? So when you take a tent grower and you put them into a commercial facility where they're inside the grow room, they don't know what a grow room feels like and what it feels like when the conditions in the environment are ideal to fast growth rates. And that's a major issue right now. Now this is a positive. I'm not making this one as a dig, but oftentimes to hobbyists, home growers, and newbies, being part of the community is the most important reward. And you really see this in the living soil world, which I think in the living soil world it actually becomes a problem because it's more important to be part of the crew, and all that stuff than it is to really start to hone your craft and get good at what you're doing. Excuse me, it's been a long day. My throat is a little hoarse. All right, so now we're going to move into those that are commercially viable. And we're just going to go ahead and jump to David King's right here. And the grow store did create the pests, pathogens, and disease. It's totally it. And I was talking with a hydroponic buddy the other day, and he said they never had any root-borne pathogens until all the beneficials started being pushed into hydro. So careful of the hydro store. All right, now if we talk about our commercially viable farmers, so this is somebody that, regardless of size and scale, is paying the bills with the activity, and that's a completely different ballgame. Now you're talking about making decisions that lead to being able to harvest again, right? So if you're at the hobbyist home grower, you have another job often. Maybe you sell a little weed on the side, and that pays for your little home grow. But there's a massive difference between being a hobbyist and actually paying the bills with the activity. And that's what the point of this show is. This whole channel, this whole Science Bro channel, is to take you from that hobbyist home grower into commercially viable. And if you're in commercially viable, take you to the next step, which is an industry leader. That's the whole point of this channel. So one downside of the current state of commercially viable farms is they still often reach for flashy products to solve a problem or increase yield. And this is one of the biggest disabilities of all growers everywhere. And one of the main reasons why I put this concept and show together is how rampant it is in the commercial space for farmers to not truly understand how to diagnose their facility, and they want to keep reaching for a new pest product. They want to keep reaching for some new surfactant or something like that. And that's not really solving any problems at all. Now, the commercially viable, again, I got to try and distill this down. So there are commercially viable people that don't do this. But if you look at the greater whole, most of them still look to the hydro stores, the online shops. They want to look at what people are doing on Instagram, and they want to look for online resources. A lot of the older guys would look at the forums. The forums are kind of dying out. Now it's kind of this Instagram world, which I don't think is helpful at all, but that may be where the popularity is. Now, the major difference between those that find a way to pay their bills with the activity and those that are just hobbyists is if they do go to the store, shops, and Instagram to find resources and solutions, they ultimately must go into that cultivation facility and use some sort of diagnostic process to figure out what the root cause to that cultivation issue. And this is one of the number one issues in all commercial spaces right now is you have people in major facilities that need to pay the bills, and they spend 99% of their time worrying about what people are doing on Instagram, Googling VPD, and that usually has nothing to do with what's going on in your cultivation space. You have got to get in there, roll up your sleeves, start taking some moisture meters, start taking some leaf surface temperatures, start overlaying a map. I had one right here somewhere on my desk, so I'll be a little more prepared next time. But one of our clients, Justin Stony Branch, he was a student, now a client, made a really beautiful map of his facility that's two-dimensional, and he overlaid plants, location, and he put more. Yeah, there he is. There we go. There's Justin. There's Justin. Justin, I almost threw your cultivation map up. I should probably be a little more organized. But Justin did a great job of using data to drive his process to win 2 cannabis cups in the last year. And what we got working is a map with plant locations, moisture percentages, temperature, fan locations. You know, if there's a problem that you're trying to diagnose, locate it on the map. And that's one of the biggest differences between those commercially viable peoples is, yes, they might go to the internet for a little bit, but by and large, most of them are going to go into their facility and try to find the problem themselves. They're going to listen to fans. They're going to pay attention to equipment. They're going to mess with the temperature and humidity settings on their computer. Excuse me, not their computer, their whatever's controlling their environment. The computer's flashing at me that something's wrong. Hopefully we're still streaming. But those true commercial guys and gals are going to worry less about what the outside world is doing, and they're going to go look for the data points and problems that are out of whack in their facility. So they're going to mess with the settings on the heating and cooling, on the humidities and fans, and they're going to mess with them and tweak with them until those pieces of equipment sound really smooth. They don't sound like they're stressing. And that's often most of the issue. Below the commercially viable, and you start looking at hobbyists and home growers and people that are struggling to pay the bills, they want to just put a set point on the wall that the internet said for VPD. And oftentimes that doesn't really matter. What you need to do is go inside your room or greenhouse or grow facility or whatever it is, and you need to set those parameters and modulate them gently and watch it for a few days. And then just keep tweaking, right? Don't get into like the pimple picking world where you just keep messing with stuff, because that's another issue that we run into. But by and large, most people that are paying their bills are able to go in and figure out something. Usually a cultivator has something that they are have kind of like a sweet spot. So some guys are better at, irrigation and automation. And so they get really good at carrying the bulk of the weight with some sort of plumbing process, electrical process, something like that. And they'll go in and focus on that one strategy to solve problems. Now, this is where it can start to be a problem because they want to rely on that one and only diagnostic process or one skill set that they have. So they want to solve all things through environment. They want to solve all things through automation. And this can get you a good way, but it's not going to solve most problems, honestly. Yeah, and this is the biggest difference between inside a tent and a larger building is like it's hard to get in there. It's hard to get in there and really experience the environment, where as soon as you start moving into rooms, you can. And I don't even know how to explain this, but when we go to a facility, there's a feeling and a sensation of an environment that feels a certain way when it's productive. So that's really hard to teach to a tent grower that's never been inside the cultivation space. And now you have a lot of tent growers being given large cultivation opportunities, and they just don't have any prior experience that can tell them what that environment is doing and what it should feel like, because they're always, locked outside of that environment, or they've got the door open to see it, which is not truly the environment. So in order to really go to that next level, you got to incorporate, in my opinion, as many diagnostic processes as you can to figure out the root cause of the cultivation issue. That's all I do, guys. And that's all I've done since 2009. I've showed up, I've taken measurements, I've tried to figure out where the problem is. I started this journey not knowing anything. I literally knew nothing. It started with a conversation around some plants that had mites. And, for those of you in the group, it's the protein story. But basically, one of the homies suggested that the plants need more proteins. And I went to go search the internet and scientific research to see, do plants use and do plants need proteins? And the answer is yes. Plants absolutely need proteins. And when proper cell formation or protein synthesis, when that is not happening, you get bugs. So the homie was right, whether he knew it or not, or he just said some stuff while being stoned. But the plants do need the proteins, and they, more importantly, need to be complete proteins. And so some of the things that impact complete protein formation are environment. This is why VPD is so popular right now. I made a whole nother video about how VPD is not appropriate to living soil, but an environment that lends itself to good growth is important. And so one of the ways that you can diagnose that, I try to get everybody to do this. You'd be surprised how few people nowadays do this, but one of my prized tools is just simply measuring leaf surface temperatures. A plant is basically an air conditioning system, and they take water from their roots and it moves through the plant tissues and out the leaves, and this is called transpiration. This is why you get humidity in your grow room, is because the moisture is moving through the plant into the air, and this is how they move nutrients. And if there's an environmental issue that affects that, well, you're probably going to get pests or disease. So leaf surface temperature is a really good starting point. Doesn't take a lot of money. Go down to the hardware store, buy yourself a $20 laser temp gun, get yourself a white piece of paper. I usually use these little booklets, and I'll hold the white piece of paper. If this is the plants, I'll shine it like this so the lights are shining down. You don't want to hold it like this because that's going to get your light temperature. You hold it like this, perpendicular, maybe right next to the plant you want to know about, and then you'll measure the ambient air temperature, and then you'll put it on the plant and you'll measure leaf surface temperature. That's one of the easiest ways to diagnose a problem. Most farmers will walk into their grow room and just say, we have mites. Well, I then come on a site visit and say, you don't actually have mites, you have a pocket of dysfunction that's due to an environmental issue that we could correct by moving fans, and that will lead to healthy transpiration, that will lead to healthy leaf surface temperatures, and then the mites tend to lessen, and then usually we make a couple other changes and then the mites go away. So what you're looking for with leaf surface temperatures is, in my opinion, a healthy plant should be a couple degrees below ambient air temperature. And don't just take one ambient air temperature for the room, take it next to the plant, because very few rooms are within a couple degrees of of the same temperature. Most rooms and greenhouses have radical swings. I know we've got a student here that's got a farm that he's consulting with that had like a 26 degree differential from end to end. So you need to measure that, because if you're not, then you're just getting bad data. So starting with moisture documentation is really good. Go through your facility with some sort of moisture meter. The Blue Lab Pulse Meter is one we have been using. I think their quality control's gone down a little bit the last couple years. I also like the Rio Temp Backyard Moisture Meter, which is a manual one that you calibrate to, which we used to use years ago. We're kind of going back to it now, honestly. And so for that one, you have to have a known set point that you want to set to. So it gets a little bit more complicated than just like reading your smartphone. But a really basic step for solving and analyzing your process and your facility, what's going wrong, is just do moisture percentage from corner to corner, put it on a chart, write it down, and then go through and get leaf surface temperatures. You might find that elevated leaf surface temperatures are also where it's really dry. You might also find it's where it's really wet. So if it's too wet, that's going to mess with transpiration. The plants aren't going to be able to effectively transpire. If it's dry, well, then now they're running out of water and they're hot. So you might have a spider mite issue in the back corner because it's hot and stressful and your plant has run out of moisture, and now the air conditioner system doesn't have coolant and they're just going to heat up. And that's pretty basic math right there. So that's a good thing to do. Now with the advent of Trollmaster, Arroyo, GrowLink, all that stuff, there's a whole lot more data and metric that we can use. And those farms that truly pay the bills use those tools. They use data. I didn't put that on here. But another thing that commercially viable farms do is often they'll use data. Now, the difference between the industry leader and the commercially viable as far as how much data they take is staggering. So I'd really like to see my people that are commercially viable move up a notch and just collect more data to improve your process and to just get better and understanding. Now, with the commercially viable people, they kind of get split into two different groups, and neither one of them is bad or good. But some people, it's more of a pride thing about their craft, like they want to be respected for growing the danks. Other people just want to be very profitable, and that's a fine reward as well. Now we're going to move into our industry leaders. So these are those people that really make the moves. I'm not talking about influencer industry leaders, because if they got 3 hours a day to live stream, they're not actually working, right? So there's a difference between influencers on the internet and actual movers and shakers and commercial drivers of the market. I'm talking about the actual farmers getting shit done. Now, one of the most common things in all of these people is they will use data and analytics to solve a problem or increase yield. They very rarely, if ever, and oftentimes are medically adverse to, and they will refuse going and trying the new hot shit. Oftentimes, if there's a new hot shit, they won't even try it, and oftentimes they have prior experience that will tell them that it's not going to work. So if you talk about like the early years of KNF, the industry leaders at the time didn't even try it, and they knew that that was way too much sugar, and that was the stuff they would say. So when that was becoming popular and it would come up in conversation, the industry leaders at the time would be like, there's no way that's going to work. That's way too much sugar, right? And so they're going to use prior experience. They will have collected a lot of data, oftentimes do more analytics than anybody else, and that's how they're going to solve a problem or increase yield. When track and trace data came in with legalization of cannabis, the industry leaders at that time took that data and used it to their advantage. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of those groups, and we were able to lead some of those data and analytic gathering activities and used it to improve our process. One of the things that I contributed to those farms and made a request was taking the per plant and per 4x4 plant yield and turning it into an overhead 2D map. That's one of the most influential things you can do to a commercial farm, is actually identify where the reduction in yield is coming from, because it's never consistent. So when the industry leader types, or really any commercial farm hires us, they want to ask us how do we get 20%, 30%, 40% more yield? Variation across the space into these new larger spaces is where that 20, 30, 40% more yield is found every single time. It can be found in variations in mineral chemistry, so it can be a soil issue. It can be variations in irrigation and fluid output in a hydroponic system. Very rarely do you get exact flow rates to all rock wool cubes in a hydro facility. I can only think of a couple in my entire life where we did an analysis, which if you're in a hydro farm, one of the best things you can do is take 3 pitchers and put it at a dripper, put it at a dripper in this corner, put a dripper in the middle, and put one just diagonally across the space. It doesn't matter which way you go, just go from this corner to this corner, one of them in the center, and just turn on the irrigation and catch it into a picture. I think you'd be shocked at how much variation is in the flow rates. That's all going to trend downstream to problems. It's never going to make things better if some plants are getting more or less water. And this happens in living soil, happens in hydro, happens in all those. But you need to come up with a way to use good, solid data. You need to take data. So if you look at like the industry leaders in hydroponics, they're most often doing a water analysis of their fertilization every single week. If you look at like those real dudes, I'm not a name dropper, so I'm not going to drop specific names, but you know who we're talking about. Those dudes, they'll do one every single week. If you look at like a good commercially viable hydroponics farm, they're probably doing it every 2 weeks. And then as you start to get down, they either don't do it ever or they do it like fairly infrequently. So that's one of the major difference from the hydroponic culture that I was raised in to this industry or to this living soil world that, you know, we're kind of steering and directing, is that it's very difficult to get living soil people to do any data and analytics at all. And it seems to be like a badge of honor to not do it. And that's why hydroponics is still bigger in size and scope and population than living soil farms, because they do more data and they do more analytics. Now, if you look at the industry leaders, like true industry leaders, not industry influencers, but like true industry leaders in the living soil space, they do far more data and analytics than all the rest of you combined. And they don't talk about it. And, you know, that is a problem. That's one of the main reasons why we started our master classes, to teach you how to use this data. Because if a farm is engaging in a very expensive, very high risk cannabis industry and they figure out a technique that leads to success, they're probably not going to jump on Instagram and tell you about it, right? So that's why we've created these master classes, to show you from experience with working some of the most influential cannabis growers on the actual planet how to solve problems in the same way. So that's what we're doing with our master classes. Now, this is one of the biggest differences in all groups. Most people right now in the commercial space, whether they're commercially viable or tent growers thrown into a state-of-the-art major facility, the industry leaders very rarely go internet search for an answer, if ever. And I can't think of a single time when I've been in a meeting or on farm with like a true industry leader and they said something like, I read some shit on the internet. In the hydroponic culture that I was raised in Southern California, which ultimately went on to be some of the most influential hydroponic growers in California, which ultimately is the planet too. If you came into the garage back then and said, I read some shit on the internet, you might get a beer thrown at you. You might get a fight over that. Like that's how opposite that was to that culture of like really effective, really qualified cultivators. So in that industry leader group, they will look for solutions inside their farm. And if they look outside their farm, they're going to call other industry leaders. And this is one of the biggest issues for those of you that aren't, immersed in the like real commercial space behind the scenes. You don't have that peer group. So that's why we started our growers group, and that's why we started that master class, so you could be a part of a peer group like that. Because Instagram's not it. It's not where there is some cool stuff going on there, but it's mostly noise. And so those industry leaders are going to look for solutions inside their farm, or they're going to phone a friend that has the same type of success and the same type of qualifications that they do, and they're going to work out that problem there. Or they'll call somebody like me, they'll call somebody like Eric Brandstan, who is an industry leader in greenhouses, and then we all have these conversations behind the scenes. Never once does the word set I read on Instagram work its way into those conversations. I can't think of a single time. Now, on the other side of that, the conversation on Instagram usually comes from people trying to guess what the industry leaders came up with. So that's where some of that noise comes from. Now, these industry leaders will also always use some sort of diagnostic process. They usually will use some level of technology. Now, that can be a downside. Sometimes they get too into, and they'll be staring at the monitor on the GrowLink, and you just probably could just look at the plants and find out. But so it can be a problem to get too into the diagnostics and to the data. I remember one time we were at a commercial farm, and there was a whole bunch of sample sets of plants, and there was some data, and everybody was staring at the data, and they really liked the data. But like when you looked at the plants, like the plants did not like that data at all. So you can't just make data our Lord and Savior. You have to look at the monitor or the patient. So my wife Sarah was a nurse. She likes to say, you also need to look at the patient. The diagnostic meter could say they're fine, but their face could be blue. You need to react to the blue face. And that kind of happens sometimes with these industry leaders because they're not looking outside. And so when they always look to solve problems themselves, they don't get to this level without being remarkable self-starting, self-solving problem type people. And that can sometimes be their downfall, is that they don't widen that gap, widen that net a little bit. I myself do that as well. I don't watch anything. I don't watch any YouTube of the industry. I don't go on Instagram and haven't been for like 8 years. I only look for answers with my own diagnostic processes. And that's got us here, and that's worked really well. But oftentimes I miss out on some other things, which for me, that's the benefit to the master classes and the growers group, because it brings in fresh eyes, and we get like functional adaptations of things that are popular right now. But the industry leaders will always, always, always go inside their farm. They'll use a diagnostic process. They'll compare data, history, and current analytics to solve the problem, to get to the root cause of the cultivation issue. And oftentimes they're quite great at that. That's why they made it to be an industry leader. It's because that's what it takes, right? Now, same kind of thing, being respected for their craft or making money is often the most important reward. And that's not negative. I think that's positive. Like, it's good to be financially viable with the job and feel proud of that. It's perfectly fine. And a lot of them at that point, because in order to go from like hobbyist home grower to paying the bills to like respected by your peers, there has to be a point when you set the bar farther than yourself. And this is something I'm seeing less and less nowadays in the commercial space. And this is something that I was raised on. I come from the sports industry, from racing. And at a certain point, the people that truly make it to the top stop racing other people. They stop competing against other people. They're now competing against themselves. And they wake up every day and they say, I'm going to beat what I did yesterday. I don't care what the rest of the world is doing. That's a major difference. Those industry leaders are not jumping on Instagram. They rarely keep up with what's going on social media, because they are, like, sometimes to a dysfunctional degree, consumed with beating yesterday's best. And that's where I get a little squirrely. Is I definitely get consumed, sometimes too much. You can see I haven't trimmed the beard in a few days because I've been at my desk trying to beat my yesterday's best. And that's, what we do up here. So now I'm going to throw in a bonus one, which is going to be the top 1% of the top 1%, AKA your favorite grower's favorite grower. And if you take, this is literally 1% of 1%. There's just a handful of humans on the planet that I would put into this group. I've worked with a good handful of them. But basically what they are is, if you take 100 people, you take that one, and you take all those ones and you put them in a pot, and you take 1 out of 100 of those. That's who I'm talking about. And again, I don't do name dropping on this show, but you know who those couple people are. There's a handful of those that I've had the pleasure of working with and provide data and analytics to help them be the top 1% and 1%. And I personally think this is what we should all be chasing for. If it's not for you, that's fine. That's what we're here to do, and that's what our master classes are here to do. And that's what a large portion of our masterclass students are also trying to do. And you will see them start to be part of this top 1 of 1, is what I like to call it. If you take nothing away from this entire presentation, take away this one statement: every single one of these people, doesn't matter if they're hydroponic, doesn't matter if they're living soil, doesn't matter if they were top 1 of 1 in the 80s, doesn't matter if they were top 1 of 1 in the 90s, 2000, doesn't matter. Every single one of them, without fail, never makes major radical jumps in any direction. They make slow moves on a much longer timeline, making one small calculated control change at a time. Now, they're not sitting back on their laurels, but they are in a very small section of their farm, or oftentimes a satellite farm, especially in the older days when things were a little bit more risky. You would have a small home grow or someone's 4-light back bedroom making those small controllable changes, proving that it works. And then if it works, you replicate it. Once it replicates, then you implement it to the whole farm. And I've worked with a lot of dudes that are like this, and all of them are respected as legends. They all have this one trait. And I think this comes from, a lot of those people come from older eras when the risks were higher, and when things went wrong, the risks were just greater. And so you could not afford to fumble, as we say. So they operate in a no fumble situation at all times, and they control the ball. They do not put the ball on the ground. Today's growers are very impatient. They're constantly trying to chase the new next thing at a timeline that's not practical to keep up with. They're constantly putting the ball on the ground. You have to maintain control. You have to maintain possession, and you guys score touchdowns. That's it. So that's one thing undeniable. Now, even more rare than the previous group, they're not paying attention to common fads. They're not paying to common trends. Oftentimes, if you present the common trend, they can make a judgment in that moment of the statistical likelihood of that actually being real. Oftentimes, when you present the common fad or trend to them, they can dissect the truth in it that may be all right, but then they can tell you 9 ways why it's not going to work. And this is one of the biggest lacking skills in the current state of cannabis right now. There's a few of them out there. And again, this comes from prior experience. This comes from prior experience, paying attention to the new things and going back to number 1, making small moves in a small controllable grow to see if there's any truth to this, and sussing it out where there's very little risk, never just jumping ship and doing things all willy-nilly. Now, if you talk about these top 1 of 1s, and you talk about the next group below them that also takes data, right? So, in the hydroponic world, these are people that are doing a fertilizer analysis every week of all rooms, right? So if you just look at like a good, respectable, paying the bills commercial hydro building, they might do a fertilizer analysis for the facility every 2 weeks. Those top guys are, if they've got 4 rooms, they're sending 4 samples a week. Oftentimes those recipes are at different stages, and the bigger and bigger you get at scale, the more frequently you're purchasing new products. And if you did any data on the products you use, you would be mind blown at the variation in that product. So they're doing as quickly as possible, keeping up with that change to have the most minor reduction in consistency, the most minor reduction in productivity, and having the most minor influence on negative effects. And, if you look at the living soil world, The few people that are truly, truly respected as being industry leaders, they've done far more data, oftentimes with us, than you could ever imagine, right? And again, they're not going to tell you that, right? If they get to that point in, this era of cannabis, which feels like a new farm's dropping off every single day, they're not going to tell you what they're doing. And I don't necessarily blame them for that. It's frustrating on my behalf. Like those of you who are members of certain email subscription to online retailers likely got an email the day after my last show trying to echo some of the stuff that I said, right? And so that shit's just annoying. We're trying to share for the good, and like this episode might get 120 views. Know for a fact all of the Living Soil online retailers and influential farms will be watching this show, right? And so that often gets used against you. So I've got to, as somebody in my position, I have to roll the dice every single time I do something like this, because I guarantee all the other, consultants in Living Soil are watching this show, trying to gather data, and then like another 60 growers are going to watch it, right? So it's always used against you. But I recently got hit by a semi truck, and I just don't care anymore. And we need to get our word out, and that's what this show's about. If the online retailers want to try and claim this information as their own tomorrow, then so be it. Show up to my job and try to do what we do. So they're going to use many times more data than anybody else, and that goes from hydroponics to Living Soil to whatever, golf course managers, doesn't matter. They are going to heavily leverage data to their benefit, and most importantly, they're going to look at historical data, right? So I've got spreadsheets and calculators that look at an entire consulting relationship, and it takes into account, we've gone so far to calculate grams of element contributed at every step of the way and correlated that to track and trace data. So at this point, I know how many pounds of fertilization needs to go into a room on top of how many grams of element in a potting soil will lead to a respectable yield. That's how far down the rabbit hole we've gone. So in the Living Soil world, you still have people trying as they may to dissuade you from doing biological data. We have done so much biological data with those top one of ones that I can tell you many weeks in advance before powdery mildew is going to show up. And that's a very powerful tool, right? And those that want to sell you powdery mildew control products are going to do everything in their power to try to dissuade you from looking into that data. And so the farmers that we work with in our consulting network happily leverage that data to get way out ahead of everybody else. Those in our master classes are now assimilating that same data, and they're going to be blowing by, and pretty soon there's going to be a whole bunch of new industry leaders popping up that you didn't even know about, and they're coming right out of these master classes. Let it be known. I'm saying it now. Knowing what data to take, I guess I should clarify. Knowing what data to take is important. Knowing how to take good data is even more important. And then being able to sit down. And so I think that's one of my gifts and skills is pattern recognition within data sets. And so I can sit up here with all my monitors, and I can pop up a bunch of data sets, and I can pick numbers and patterns out of it. I don't know that everybody has that skill set. That's one of mine. And then we can start to translate that into actionable advice, right? So now, if you look at this top 1% of 1%, beating their own personal best is often the most important reward, because remember, quite a while ago, they already blew past everybody else. So it's not about beating the neighbors anymore. And that's often where these commercial people get complacent, is they get better than the people in their peer group and stay there. They get better than the people in their local community and they stay there. They get better than people in their general region and they stay there. In order to be up in that top 1% of the top 1%, you have got to have some sort of like animal inside you that wakes up every single day, doesn't give a shit about what anybody else is doing, and tries to beat what you did yesterday. Just look at them up there. I've been there, I've sat there, I've had lunch with these people, I've spent the night at a lot of these people's house. We've had very close, intimate relationships in the consulting space with these top farms on the planet. Every single one of them wakes up in the morning and tries to beat their own best. That's for sure, right? So I hope this helps. And I hope that you are able to gain some sort of value from this. We're coming up on an hour. Justin is definitely chasing it every day. And Justin is definitely beating his personal best every day. And Justin's probably going to win a couple Cannabis Cups this year. So be on the lookout for Stony Branch Hemp. If you are watching this after the live stream and you got some questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. If you've got some ideas or suggestions for some upcoming videos, I'm all ears. We got a lot of stuff to do with our work. We got a lot of stuff to do with our classes, and often I get busy. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention, our next masterclass starts Friday. So we've been so busy with work, I didn't even get in here to try and tell you about it. But our next round of soil balancing class starts this Friday, April 12th. We offered a new trio discount because we know everybody in the world is on a tight budget right now. And so we wanted to make a discount, and we found out that most people just take all the classes anyways. Soil balancing right here is starting this Friday. We're starting the next Crescent Method basic training on 11th, on Thursday. I guess we're starting that on Thursday. So we're starting the next round of basically the distilled version of our consulting on Thursday and Friday. So soil balancing is going to be on Fridays this year. Crescent Method basic training is going to be on Thursdays, and that's going to go. The next soil balancing class is going to be June 28th, and the final class of the year will start around September 13th. And our Crescent Method basic training will have one more class after this, which is May 16th. So Crescent Method basic training is meant to be a grow along where we help you. So we're kind of condensing that class into the actual growing season. Soil balancing, we're just kind of on a repeat. We got some cool stuff coming up for soil balancing. I'm not going to announce them until it's fully ready because I don't want other people trying to take credit for it. But we got some cool stuff coming up, and we will let you know soon. Again, if you've got some cool ideas for a show, or you want us to answer some sort of questions you may have, let us know. Let us know what you want to hear. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. I don't know how to turn off the live stream. There we go.